On a quiet street in a small town, as the evening light faded and the world seemed wrapped in warmth, one girl sat alone on the cold curb, hungry, tired, and invisible to everyone, except a 7-year-old child who pointed at her father and asked a question that would change all their lives forever. If you are new to the channel, then please subscribe to the channel and like the video, and tell us where you are watching from. If this story moved you, we'd love to hear your thoughts, so drop a comment below and tell us what you think. Now, let's jump into the story. It was a September evening in the small town of Rosewood. The air carried the cool touch of early autumn, and the sky glowed with fading shades of gold and pink. The streets were calm, lined with tidy houses, each with a warm light in the window. Children coasted home on bicycles, their laughter carrying faintly through the stillness. The smell of fresh bread and dinner cooking drifted from open kitchens, wrapping the neighborhood in comfort. It was the kind of evening that made the world seem gentle and safe, but not for everyone. On the corner of Maple Street, a young woman sat alone. Her name was Claire. She looked no older than 18, but the exhaustion in her face told a different story. She wore a worn-out hoodie, the cuffs frayed from years of use, and held a faded backpack against her side like it was the only thing she could trust. Her knees were pulled close to her chest. Strands of hair fell into her tired eyes, but she didn't bother to brush them away. Claire hadn't eaten in more than a day. She could not remember the last time someone had spoken to her with kindness. Her voice, if she had used it, would have sounded weak. She kept her gaze low, studying the cracks in the pavement, not because she found them interesting, but because she knew what happened when you met the wrong eyes on the street. She had learned to keep herself small and unnoticed. Her mind was on one thing: where to sleep that night. She had been chased off from a park bench 2 nights ago and told to move along at the bus station the night after. The spaces that were quiet enough to rest were never safe, and the places that were safe never stayed quiet. The perfect homes around her looked like another world, one she had never been part of. Across the street, Daniel Rowan was walking home from the market. His hands held 2 grocery bags, and beside him walked his 7-year-old daughter, Emily, clutching his hand as they chatted about dinner. Daniel had been a carpenter in Rosewood for most of his life. Since losing his wife 4 years earlier, his world had centered around his daughter. Their evenings were often simple: home-cooked meals, a little homework, a bedtime story. Emily was a child who noticed things others didn't. She spotted stray cats in alleyways, worms on the sidewalk after rain, and tiny wildflowers growing between fence posts. That night, as they turned toward Maple Street, she saw Claire. She stopped walking, tugging her father's hand so sharply that he almost dropped the groceries. "Dad," Emily whispered, her voice full of concern, "why is that girl sitting there like that?" Daniel followed her gaze. He saw the way Claire's shoulders curved inward, as though she were bracing against something unseen. Her hoodie was thin for the chill, and her shoes looked worn almost to breaking. He recognized the signs. He had seen them before, in others who had been left without a home. "Maybe she's just resting," Daniel said softly, but even as he spoke, he doubted it. Emily didn't look convinced. She stared at Claire, her brow furrowed, the way it did when she was deciding something important. After a moment, she said, "She looks hungry." Daniel felt a quiet shift inside him. There were reasons to keep walking, to mind his own business. But there was also a truth he had taught Emily again and again, that if you can help someone, you should. Across the street, Claire sensed eyes on her. She looked up briefly, saw the man and the little girl, and quickly looked away. She was used to stares. Sometimes they were sharp with judgment. Other times they were blank, as if she were invisible. Either way, she knew they never meant safety. But Emily's gaze was different. It was steady, curious, without the edge that made her want to run. The street was quiet, except for the faint hum of a distant car. The sun had slipped lower, the air growing colder. Daniel shifted the grocery bags in his hands. He could feel his daughter's unspoken plea beside him. In that moment, a decision began to take shape, one that would change the course of not only Claire's night, but her life. He looked at Emily, then back at the girl on the corner. He did not know her story, not yet, but he knew he couldn't ignore her. He said quietly, "Let's go say hello." Emily's small hand tightened around his. Together, they stepped off the curb and started across Maple Street. And for the first time in days, Claire felt something stir inside her, a faint, unsure flicker of hope. Claire noticed the man and the little girl moving toward her. Her body tensed, the way it always did when strangers approached. Her fingers gripped the strap of her backpack until her knuckles turned pale. She had learned to be ready to leave at any moment. Most people who walked up to her did not bring kindness. Daniel slowed his pace as they reached the edge of the sidewalk. He crouched slightly so he wasn't towering over her, keeping his voice calm and his hands visible. "Hi there," he said gently. "My name's Daniel. This is my daughter, Emily. We live just across." The food was simple, but it felt like a treasure in that moment. Emily sat down on the pavement beside her, cross-legged, her little hands resting on her knees. "What's your name?" she asked softly. After a pause, Claire answered in a quiet voice. "Claire." "I like that," Emily said. "Do you have somewhere to go tonight?" Claire shook her head. Emily turned to her father. "Dad, can she come home with us? We have soup and bread and Mom's blanket on the couch." Claire's eyes lifted for the first time, expecting the man to say no. She had heard refusals all her life, usually followed by someone telling her to move along. But Daniel didn't say no. He looked at Claire and said, "Only if you're comfortable. We're not here to make you feel trapped. We just want to offer a warm meal and a safe place for the night." Claire studied his face. There was no push, no false smile, just a steady calm. Part of her wanted to walk away, to keep her distance as she always had. But another part, small and tired, wanted to believe this was different. She finally whispered, "Just for tonight." "Just for tonight," Daniel agreed. The walk to their home was short, but to Claire, it felt like crossing into another world. The warmth from inside greeted her before she even stepped through the door. The scent of something cooking in the kitchen wrapped around her like a memory she had never owned. Daniel set the groceries down while Emily ran to get the promised blanket. It was thick, soft, and smelled faintly of laundry soap. She draped it over the couch and patted the cushion. "You can sit here while Dad makes the soup," she said proudly. Claire sat, still holding her backpack close. The heat from the room began to thaw the cold that had settled in her bones. Daniel moved in the kitchen, the quiet sound of pots and spoons filling the background. Emily returned with 2 mugs of tea, setting one carefully on the table in front of Claire. "It's not hot anymore," she explained, "so you can drink it right away." When the soup was ready, Daniel set a bowl in front of her, along with a slice of warm bread. She ate slowly at first, then faster, until the bowl was empty. No one rushed her. No one asked questions she wasn't ready to answer. Later, Emily showed her to a small guest room. The bed was neatly made, with 2 extra pillows and a folded quilt at the end. A small lamp cast a soft golden light across the room. I put my favorite bear here too, Emily said, pointing to a stuffed animal resting by the pillow. He's good for sleeping. You can borrow him. Claire didn't know what to say. She stood there for a moment, then sat on the bed, still in her hoodie, her backpack beside her. The quiet in the room was different from the quiet of the streets. It was safe, not empty. As Daniel turned off the hall light, he said, "Rest. You're safe here tonight." Claire lay down slowly, the blanket warm over her. Her eyes stayed open for a while, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant clink of dishes in the kitchen. For the first time in weeks, she did not have to plan where she would go next. Tonight, she could simply sleep. The morning sun slipped through the thin curtains, casting soft lines of light across the small guest room. Claire woke slowly, unsure for a moment where she was. Then she noticed the blanket tucked around her, the faint scent of soap, and the stuffed bear resting beside her pillow. It wasn't the hard bench of a bus stop. It wasn't the cold ground behind a store. It was warm, quiet, and still. Down the hall, she could hear gentle movement, dishes clinking, a kettle boiling. She sat up, pulling her hoodie around her, and opened the door. Daniel was in the kitchen, pouring coffee. Emily was at the table, drawing in a notebook, her small legs swinging under the chair. "Morning," Daniel said with a nod, as though it were the most natural thing for her to be there. "Morning," Claire replied quietly, still unused to speaking in the early hours. Breakfast was simple: scrambled eggs, toast, and a glass of juice. Claire hesitated at first, unsure if she should join them, but Daniel motioned to a chair. "Sit, eat," he said. She did, and for a little while, the silence between bites was comfortable. Days began to pass like this. Claire stayed. At first, unsure of how long she would be welcome. Every morning she would ask, "Should I go?" And every time, Daniel would answer, "Not if you don't want to." She began helping with small things: folding laundry, sweeping the porch, washing dishes after dinner. It wasn't out of obligation. It was her way of feeling less like she was taking without giving back. One evening, while Emily was coloring on the living room floor, Claire shared bits of her story. She told them about growing up in foster homes, how each one seemed to care less than the last. She told them about being told to leave just before her 18th birthday because the family didn't want the responsibility anymore. Since then, she had slept in stairwells, bus shelters, and once in a laundromat until someone told her to leave. She didn't share everything at once. Some memories stayed locked away, too heavy to open, but Daniel never pressed for more than she wanted to say. Emily, however, didn't need all the details to understand. She simply stayed close, inviting Claire to join her for board games, asking her to read stories aloud, or pulling her into the kitchen to help bake cookies. Little by little, Claire began to laugh again. Sometimes it was a quiet laugh, almost unsure. Other times, it was sudden and unguarded, surprising even herself. But it wasn't all easy. One afternoon, while Claire was in the yard helping Daniel fix a broken fence post, a neighbor passing by glanced at her and muttered, "Who's the street kid?" Daniel didn't respond. He simply stood still until the man moved on. Claire kept working, but the words sat heavy in her chest for the rest of the day. A week later, there was a knock at the door. Two people stood outside, representatives from Child Services. Someone had called to report a homeless teenager living in the house of a single father with a young daughter. The questions were direct, the tone official. Daniel explained the situation clearly. He told them Claire had nowhere safe to go and that she was welcome to stay as long as she wanted. When they spoke to Claire alone, she met the caseworker's eyes and said, "This is the first place I've ever felt safe." That seemed to matter. The visit ended with a temporary guardianship arrangement. something that would allow her to stay legally while a longer process was considered. Daniel began looking into fostering options, determined to make her part of their family in every way he could. Life began to find a rhythm. Claire started attending a nearby program to prepare for her high school equivalency exam. She would come home in the afternoons to the smell of dinner cooking and the sound of Emily talking about her day. She still kept her backpack close, a habit she wasn't ready to give up, but she no longer kept it within arm's reach at all times. There were small changes that Daniel noticed. How she no longer jumped every time the doorbell rang. How she would sometimes hum softly while washing dishes. How she started leaving her bedroom door open during the day. Claire had spent years being told she didn't belong anywhere. But here, she was beginning to believe she might. And though she didn't say it out loud, she was starting to wonder if just for tonight could turn into something more. Winter had passed, and spring brought soft green leaves to the trees in Rosewood. Claire's days no longer blurred together in a restless search for safety. Instead, each one carried purpose. She had passed her high school equivalency exam, and Daniel and Emily had celebrated with a small cake at the kitchen table. Now she was taking classes at the community college, her mind set on a goal she had once thought was impossible: becoming a youth advocate for teens in foster care. Daniel continued the long process of applying for permanent guardianship. The paperwork was heavy, the meetings endless, but he never spoke of giving up. Claire didn't ask about every detail, but she noticed how he kept important documents neatly stacked on the counter, and how his eyes lit up whenever progress was made. Emily seemed certain of the outcome from the very beginning. To her, Claire was already family. She would introduce her to friends at school by saying, "This is my big sister." Every time she said it, Claire felt a quiet warmth inside, a warmth that had nothing to do with the weather. Still, the journey wasn't without moments of doubt. There were nights when Claire lay awake, staring at the ceiling, afraid it would all be taken away. She had been moved before, uprooted without warning, and part of her wondered if this too might vanish. But each morning, when she came to the kitchen and found a place set for her at the table, the fear faded a little more. Months passed, and the day finally came. The courthouse in Rosewood was small, with worn wooden benches and a faint scent of old paper. Claire sat beside Daniel and Emily, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The judge read through the case, reviewing the months of care and stability she had found with the Rowans. When the final words came, they felt unreal at first. "Congratulations, Mr. Rowan. Claire is now your legal daughter." Claire's breath caught. Emily let out a small cheer, hugging her so tightly she almost lost her balance. Daniel smiled through eyes that shone with quiet relief. The celebration that night was simple: homemade dinner, a few neighbors who had supported them, and a chocolate cake topped with candles. Claire's name, written in icing, felt like the sweetest detail. She didn't need a grand party. She needed exactly what she had: a table surrounded by people who wanted her there. Life settled into its new shape. Claire adjusted to the idea that she no longer had to plan for where she would sleep or whether her things would be safe. She still kept her old backpack in the closet, not because she needed it anymore, but as a reminder of how far she had come. As the years moved forward, Claire earned her degree in psychology. She began working as a counselor, focusing on young people who had faced situations like hers. She often told them, "I know it doesn't feel like it now, but the right people can change everything." On the morning of Emily's high school graduation, the Rowan house was filled with the sound of laughter and the rustle of gift wrap. Claire stood in the kitchen, helping prepare breakfast while Emily practiced her speech one last time. Daniel watched them from the doorway, a quiet smile on his face. Later that afternoon, they sat together in the crowded gymnasium, waiting for the ceremony to begin. Claire felt a mix of pride and gratitude, knowing she was exactly where she was meant to be. After the ceremony, someone asked her how she had come to this point in her life. Claire paused, her gaze drifting toward Emily, who was laughing with her friends. Then she answered with a small smile. It started one evening when a little girl saw me sitting alone and asked her father a question that changed my life. It was a truth she carried with her, a reminder that sometimes the smallest act of kindness could open the door to a new chapter. And in that chapter, Claire had found not just shelter, but a home, a family, and a future worth building.